Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital from the Doctor of Digital podcast. The purpose of the show is to transform your business and life with education and inspiration. I introduce busy business leaders to trends in business, technology, and marketing to highlight people you should know. Feeling overwhelmed by today's constant outrage and division? What if there was a way to navigate complex issues with respect and find common ground? Today's guest, author of the book Deep Tradeoffs, Finding Balance and Respect in a Polarized, Angry World, promises just that. This book, packed with over 300 quotes and written in a relatable style, explores the unavoidable conflicts in our values and beliefs. Deep Tradeoffs delves into how we can approach these situations with respect and understanding, even when we disagree. Guiding us through this crucial conversation is my guest, a seasoned leader with a remarkable career. He boasts a background spanning CEO roles in startups and turnarounds, along with experience at Procter & Gamble in consumer marketing. My guest also has served as entrepreneur in residence at Vanderbilt University's technology company, demonstrating a deep understanding of building successful businesses. Most importantly, he possesses a unique talent for simplifying complex situations, and what's more valuable than that in our current climate. Get it ready to learn how to navigate disagreements productively and find that elusive balance in a polarized world. During this episode, we'll do a deep dive into the changes and hot topics of balance and respect in a polarized, angry world. We'll leverage the expertise of my guest and how to navigate the unique dynamics of the field. By the end of this episode, you'll be better equipped to know what to do, and I encourage you to contact my guest, Mike Hassell, author of Deep Tradeoffs. With that, I want to welcome Mike to the program. How are you today, sir?
Great, Mick. It's terrific to see you.
Likewise, I've been very excited to talk to you, and I can't believe all the things that we have in common. But I'm really curious if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this field in the first place to write a book like this?
Well, I come from a family of engineers, and I wanted to be an engineer. I got electrical engineering degree. Felt like I was being trained for a profession rather than being educated in a broader sense. I was interested in philosophy and humanities and things I knew nothing about, could not take courses on. And so I sort of switched gears and pointed myself toward business school, toward the management end of things rather than the technical end of things.
All right.
And I ended up going back and getting another graduate degree in the humanities because I was hungry to learn. I'm just curious and have been since I was born. So then in mid-career, about age 40, I had an aha moment because I was running a business on the great ideas of history, similarly looking to satisfy this hunger that I had to understand these things. And so Knowledge Products was about great ideas of philosophy, political thought, economics. Sure. And we did one on moral problems of our age. And in working on that, I had this aha moment that, hey, all that I'm trained to do is not suited to solving these problems.
Right.
Because there's not an answer to a moral problem. These are competing values, both of which cannot be realized, but they have to be balanced and managed and interconnected and interwoven in a skillful way. So I've spent the last 25 years since that observing more examples of trade-offs. And so I've identified about 30 what I call deep trade-offs, not just pro and con, strengths and weaknesses, stuff like that, but deep ones like, should we struggle or submit and be peaceful? Right? Should we live in our imagination or in physical reality? Should we search for liberty or equality?
Wow.
Those two complete. If you're going to be more equal, you've got to quash liberty. So there's a bunch of these that I'm looking forward to talking with you about some of them.
Yeah, I can't even think of a more appropriate topic than what you're addressing here, because if you want to see a polarized, angry world, we are in it. But now that it's been quite a while, it's been some time. Could you tell us a little bit about the changes that you have seen over the last several decades or so?
Well, when I got out of business school, FedEx was new. CNN was new.
Mm.
Microcomputers weren't really happening yet. Wi-Fi was a decade or two into the future. So, it's like that old story about getting children to sit down and look at a dial-up phone or, this floppy disk into a computer. Our technology for connecting with people has just completely transformed the way we operate. And I haven't spoken yet of iPhones, and all of the benefits and problems that that's bringing to us.
Mm.
You're back to a deep trade-off that almost any of these things has a good side and a bad side. We're living kind of with the bad side of some of the social effects of social media and what it's doing to young teenage girls and things like that. I think there's more to come in controlling the harm that comes from impressionable, especially girls, that are hurt by rejection and trolling and things like that. So none of that existed. I mean, we call people on the phone. Email didn't exist when I was in college. So, we keep learning, we keep changing, and those are the most important changes that come to mind, but it's not all of them.
Yeah, there are probably some topics that they'd say were hot topics because with the introduction of the iPhone, I always say, we have these tracking devices now too, because we have phones and everybody's carrying them. So there are some things like that. Could you address some of the topics that you had mentioned and maybe other things as well that you think are appropriate and related to the book?
Yeah, you're talking about in terms of trade-offs?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I choose three of them for the first volume. I have in mind that there may be as many as 8 volumes of this, but the three that I deal with initially are peace and struggle, imagination and reality, and honesty and deception. Now, the reason I chose those is that peace and struggle kind of underlies everything. Are we going to resist and object and challenge and hold accountable and all of that kind of business? Or are we going to forgive and reconcile and be settled? Striving is not peaceful. And so we all claim we want peace, but we want peace on our terms. We could get the polarization done right now if people would just resign and do it the other guy's way. But people are not going to do that. They want things to be aligned with their values. And so an example is, I'm quite big on liberty. I believe in the founder's vision of a country that was run based on people's conscience. And now we have politics that are trying to control the excesses of that and are very big on equality and accountability, blaming people for things that their ancestors did.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a clear imbalance in that. One of the other things that comes to mind is we look to science for solutions to this, and science can't solve it.
Yeah.
Back to my aha moment. You can't reconcile the problems of abortion by some formula. There's duty not to harm. There's duty, respect for law, respect for autonomy, with people making their own decisions. Those things have to be reduced or increased in some measure that we can't seem to agree on. But that's the challenge, is this balance. It's not finding a scientific answer that's going to trump everyone and get us to a universal solution.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of peace is interesting. It reminds me of what they said about the Romans, right? So the Romans would conquer and destroy somewhere, and then they called it peace, because
Yes.
it's one-sided. It's not really peace. It just means the Romans dominated people. So
yeah, it's arrested conflict. I have one quote from a blogger who says, "We don't have peace. We just have arrested conflict for temporary periods of time."
Yeah, there's something to that.
I talk about honesty and deception. Everybody thinks they're for truth, and it's one of their highest values, being genuine and authentic and truthful, but it's not our highest value. Survival is more important. We will lie in order to survive.
Right.
The gentlest mother will attack somebody if their children are threatened, right? So peace is not a highest value. But particularly back on the one about honesty, when people are dominated, they're generally going to resist oppression and will lie in order to avoid it. They'll lie in order to avoid harm. If somebody's going to hurt my family, I'll lie to them if I can stop it.
Sure. Yeah, there's one of those famous examples, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran theologian talked about, well, what would you do if the Nazis come to your door? Like, where you lie to protect people? Well, of course you're going to lie. You're not
Sure.
going to
Yeah.
reveal them, right?
Yeah. That's the classic example. But if you look at it carefully, we're deceiving all the time, including ourselves, about how good we are, how successful we are, how likely we are to succeed in what we're doing right now. Adam Smith said this: if we didn't misjudge that, there's a lot of things you never get out of starting blocks because the risks are pretty high.
Absolutely.
I chose to be an entrepreneur because I didn't want to get to the end and regret that I didn't try. I'd rather have tried and failed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was biased toward taking risks, and good thing because I failed plenty of times.
Yeah, again, reminds me of a famous quote, Michael Jordan, about I'm successful because of how many shots I've missed and how many times that I made mistakes, because that's where you learn. It's the best way to
That's right.
learn things.
Exactly.
I'm curious if you could say something about generally recommending business owners or leaders, because you have a unique approach. And how would you say, and what are some of the groundbreaking ideas that you would like to reveal from the book?
Well, some of them may seem apparent, like listening instead of telling. That's the way I like to condense that one as an example of making a complex thing into simple. Uh, we often think we know the answer and we're trying to persuade the other side to come to our point of view, right? But they have different experiences and different priorities and different way of applying principles and values. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to really reconcile with somebody that just wants to tell me why I'm wrong. I've had this example in the last couple of weeks. I complained about something and the person just told me I was wrong. Didn't ask me why I thought what I did. And I might be wrong. Maybe she can show me where I'm wrong. But we didn't have the conversation because we got shortcut by telling. So, that's a simple example. The deeper example is always looking for an alternative to your point of view.
Mm.
Because I'm developing this theory that every value has a rival, a legitimate alternative. So you think of any value that you're really committed to. Kindness might be the one you'd think would be hardest to overcome. What's wrong with being kind? Well, football coaches will tell you sometimes it doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes children need more than a friend. They need a firm authority, and they may not like it, and they may not perceive it as kind, but that's the way they learn. So the broader point is that every value, I think, has some alternative, and there's going to be somebody on the other side of that. In a federal election in the United States, there's going to be tens of billions of people on the side of most any issue you pick. They're not stupid, they're not evil, which is often what you see in the media. That's what it gets reduced to, because people can't find another way to disqualify the other side except to say those things about them. So taking people seriously, respecting that they may have some intelligence and may have something to teach us, is a way better platform for finding some friendship. And the third thing I'll say in this respect is that relationships precede solutions. It's not
Mm.
going, we're going to agree and then become friends. It's we're going to become friends and then we're going to find some agreement, or we're going to find some differences in point of view and live with them, right? But people are loved into change. They're not shoved into it. So the point is, make friends even with somebody you don't agree with or don't like. But come to some way of coexisting, of living with them, so you can understand why they may think the way they do and insist on the way they do. And in a free society, they should be able to do that. Problem's not disagreement. It's stitched into our life, into human life, I think, but especially in a free society. Freedom is basically invites disagreement.
Mm.
It's coercion that's the problem. Saying, I'm right, you've got to do things my way. That's where the fights start.
Right. When you talk about trade-offs, could you kind of delve into that a little bit more? Because if you have two competing principles or values, do you have to choose one over the other? Or you're implying that there's a balance so you can get a little bit of some and a little bit of the other. But how does that work out in practical terms?
I like to think of it in terms of management. They're both things you need to do, and you need to mix and match in an appropriate combination. Sometimes it might be all of one or the other. You may have to choose, but more typically, you're mixing these things, and you're doing it not only in your own uh, interests, in your own priorities, but balancing it with other people's priorities. You have a family that doesn't like sports, and you're watching TV, sports all day long. This is going to produce problems. They're not wrong, right? This is a trivial example, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think it turns out to be a mixture, and these things can never be reconciled. That's why they're deep trade-offs. They're not scientific solutions where we're going to come to a point of view that A is the solution, B is wrong. They're both right in different degrees. That's got all kinds of consequences. And I have a quote from a philosopher that says, all truths are half truths. Mm-hmm. They're probabilistic, and they apply in some situations and not others. So when we begin to think this way, we begin to be a little bit more humble that we've got it right. So we've got it right in part, but there are places where our rightness doesn't work, and we need to hear from others who are better critics of it than we're going to be.
It always sounds to resonate with so many things. Like famous quote or a common quote is, truth is a hard deer to hunt. It's a Native American expression. I go, yeah, it's really true. When a lot of us are younger, we think it's all black and white. And as you get older, you go, there's a lot more gray in there than I ever thought. Are you thinking about the book in terms of applying to any particular field, or is it general, or what would you say? Because you mentioned even relationships too. This is on the level of personal relationships and family relationships as well.
I think one of the fascinating things about it is that it's so broad and it can be applied, So, my dream would be this ends up being like chicken soup for the soul. And you have one for business, you have one for religion, and you have one for nonprofits, and because they all have their own versions of these kind of problems, and you could apply them in a specific way. Mm-hmm. I don't plan to do that myself because I don't think I can live long enough to write all of that out. But it's an interesting prospect if we ever get there. My interest is in expanding from the 3 I've talked about in volume 1 to the 30 that I've already been thinking about and collecting quotes about and finding ways to articulate. These things are generally beneath our immediate awareness. We're dealing with them all the time, but we're not necessarily conscious of them. So one of my friends called this kind of a call to consciousness. It's not that we don't know this, but we're not dealing with it and not quite accepting that there's this rivalry. One thing I just flew across my mind a second ago is we have people trying to shut down other people's speech because it's false. Well, we just talked about the elusiveness of truth. Who am I to say that it's false, right? And this is a disease in our culture that we're not even willing to listen to somebody to see why they think what they think is true. It's the reason in the law, you don't prosecute liars. Yeah. There's certain forms of libel and things like that, but generally it's up to the person hearing to judge what's true or not, and not go to the police and say, he told me a fib, put him in jail. It's not illegal. Because he may think it's true, right? His truth is not my truth. So, here you get into absolute truth versus relative truth, and people fight again over that. In the end, truths are tentative. Even scientific truths get overruled,
No question. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's Thomas Kuhn, the paradigm shift, because science is not fixed. It's constant revision. And there are times that say, well, there's an entire paradigm shift because the whole universe has changed based on new scientific knowledge. So you have to be open to things, even things that seem very strange and even heretical, because there may be something to that.
And the example of that I talk about in Deep Tradeoffs in the book is Isaac Newton discovered gravity and force equal mass times acceleration. It works great for normal frames of references that people live on the surface of the earth. It does not work at cosmological scale. Yeah. Einstein had different formulas that changed the notion of gravity at that scale. It does not work at subatomic scale. And so we've increased our field of vision. Newton couldn't see the outer reaches of the universe like we can, nor the atom. So he wasn't wrong. He's still not wrong for the frame of reference he was talking about. But we see new things and we develop new rules for it. And who knows what we haven't seen yet. So these truths are never ultimate and permanent.
With your background, I'm wondering if you could say something about what is your expertise and how do you apply this to maybe business or life or society for that matter. But what kind of actionable tips could you provide?
When I was writing this and sharing it with others, I often got the question, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Now I'm made aware of this in a little better way. So I wrote a fourth chapter that's got about 100, things taken from other people about how to deal with disagreement. One really good one is to just use the simple phrase, have you considered?
Mm, yeah.
It doesn't tell somebody they're wrong. It doesn't tell somebody that they're ignorant or incomplete. It's just, have you thought about this? The CEO of Procter & Gamble was known for that. He never gave instructions, because then you don't have people thinking for themselves and they'll let you fail.
Yeah.
You've told them to do something and they don't think it's right, but they'll do it and then it'll fail and I'll show you. Right. So if you want people engaged, you respect their intelligence and just use a question like, have you considered? What about this? And they're more questioning than telling, as I mentioned before.
Sure.
So I think of that as process. That fourth chapter here are techniques and tactics and processes we can use in the way we treat one another. That's what you mostly read, I think, when people are talking about conflict and polarization. What I'm trying to get to is something a little bit different, which is this clash in values that we all have, and learn to see things in a more equivocal way. That means equal voice, right?
Yeah.
Equivocal. So you recognize the legitimacy in two competing ideas. And once you're sensitized to that, you see it in everyday news. I go through the newspapers and I make a little mark and I put it in a file for a future chapter about force versus persuasion, for instance. About nature and civilization. We're one way in nature, we're a different way in civilization. What does that mean? So you see it all the time if you're just sensitized to it.
Right. And you're looking for it. You've got some actionable tips. You've got some great suggestions. And I would even say groundbreaking, because this is a polarized, angry world. Now that people know about your background and what you offer and the insights in the book, how do people get a hold of you? How do you get in touch? And what would you recommend? Is the book available? Where is it? Those kinds of things. I'm
The
curious.
book is on Amazon. I'd recommend people check out the reviews and just get a sense of how people respond to this. Some people say things like, it's made my career better. I want to share it with all my bosses, so they can help us apply this to our business. Yesterday, I ran into a lady who said, this has made me more hopeful for the future. Good. Because, some people come up to me and say, this started with Trump, didn't it? Well, no, it started before the founding, but particularly in a democracy, they were very aware that people are going to be in factions and compete with ideas. I have a quote from Jefferson that says, talking to having a political argument with somebody that's agitated is a losing proposition. It's like fighting a bull. Move on. And this was in 1700s. He called John Adams a witch. Adams called him a hermaphrodite. We think of these as noble, great people. They scrapped like the best of us. They were nasty, but they became friends at the end of their life. So, in terms of your question, I have a website. It's called deeptradeoffs.com, www.deeptradeoffs.com. Okay. It's basically a placeholder at this point. It's got some reviews and a link to Amazon to buy the book. You could go into a bookstore and ask for it, but bookstores are hard. There's so little space and so many titles. They can order it, but they won't have it in stock.
Right.
So you can go to my site or go to Amazon and read the book. You can reach me. There's a place on the site to send an email, or you can send an email to mike@deeptradeoffs.com.
Awesome. It's unusual to find wisdom, but there are nuggets and gems of wisdom. So I appreciate the sharing it, and it's not any more timely than what you're addressing. So I hope people go out and get that book and get in touch with you. You got a lot to offer. Thanks for being my guest today, Mike.
Thank you.
You bet. So if you like guests like Mike, hopefully you contact him as well, and you learned a lot like I did today. Make sure that you are liking, subscribing, positively reviewing, and sharing everything that you have seen on the Doctor of Digital podcast. I also want to thank my sponsors, both the publishers of Burning America and On Track, Ian Hunter, for all their support of the program. Until next time, this is the Doctor of Digital signing off. Deus Vult.